Yes. And talking of that, Craig, in a film where the characters move from the seaside city of Nice to go to Paris at one point, and a key point of being in Paris is to go for seafood. Let's carry on with the illogic that is Maximum Risk.
Aye. Oh dear. I'm really glad I've had a stiff drink before we begin this tonight. Okay, the mid-90s. Remember those? Hell of a time. Turns out to have been golden hour for big-budget action movies, but we weren't to know that. We were in our mid-teens, in love with Hong Kong heroic bloodshed, and if anyone so much as looked at a pair of matching handguns, our brains probably started melting out of our ears. In 1993, John Woo made the hop across the Pacific to make his US debut with Hard Target, which my comrades have spoken about at some length already in a prior podcast. At that point, the movie's star, one Jean-Claude Van Damme, had a bit of momentum behind him, and it's not hard to imagine that he saw in that movie's success something of a formula. So it was, Van Damme himself suggested tapping up more Hong Kong talent, this time City on Fire director Ringo Lam, for another high-profile outing in the form of 1996's Maximum Risk. Pair Van Damme up with a smoking hot 20-something rising star in the form of Natasha Henstridge, a transatlantic Nice cops versus New York Rusky gangsters plot, a hot pinch of mistaken identity, shake over ice, and watch the kudos and cash come rolling on in. Totally didn't work. Alain Moreau, explains the accent, is a Nice cop whose attention is called by his colleague Sebastian, Jean Hughes' actually French Anglade, to the appearance of a corpse which looks staggeringly similar to Alain. Actually, it's identical. We, the audience, have been privy in the first 5 minutes of the movie as to how the corpsage evented itself. But I'm not going to bother too much with that because it's quite unintentionally funny. And the only moment I actually enjoyed in the entire movie. That's a lie, as we were discussing off mic earlier. So I'd quite like to keep it for myself, if you don't mind. Anywho, a bit of rummaging around in a lawyer's office reveals two things: an adoption agreement and a large angry Russian psycho with a red face called Redface. Red-faced Julie gets his comeuppance as he is knocked cold by Alain and thrown into the raging furnace that is the now torched office. There'll be no coming back from that. Alain discovers that the dead man is in fact his identical twin, of course, Mikhail Suvorov, separated at an early age and raised by a wealthy gangster on the streets of New York's Little Odessa. Mikhail had apparently been making a clean break from that way of life and was in search of his brother when the Russians caught up with him in Nice. Determined to get to the bottom of all this rather, than having the sense one would assume of a seasoned detective and keeping well clear of incredibly dangerous gangsters on an entirely separate continent, Alain reckons it would be a hoot to fly to New York and have a poke around in Mikhail's old life. Because I want to know my brother. Along the way, he is, obviously, mistaken for his twin brother, who nobody had any reason to know about, and subsequently, Mikhail's problems are now Alain's problems. Oh, and Mikhail's girlfriend too, because there's nothing morally reprehensive about sleeping with a woman who legitimately thinks you're her partner, as opposed to his twin brother who she didn't know existed. Hilarity ensues. Only it doesn't. This podcast has laboured tirelessly now to bring to your attention that the only thing conceivably better than a Van Damme is two Van Dammes. I think the collective noun is a split of Van Dammes. And
How long did you work on that?
I'm really pleased with that. Don't take that away from me. That was the first time in years I've been proud of something as I was typing it.
I'll remember to play this episode for your kids sometime soon, Craig.
Remember not to swear, Craig. So, yeah, consider this an apology of sorts. Almost nothing about Maximum Risk makes sense, from the plot to the casting to the fact that Ringo Lam would look at the script and think, yes! I watched this movie 2 nights ago and I already remember almost nothing of it, bar the funny bit I mentioned at the start and the sight of Natasha Henstridge naked, which is exactly why Natasha Henstridge was cast in this movie. It's really sad to think it's taken almost a quarter century to bury this kind of lecherous gaze in mainstream movies, which, bizarrely this kind of was at the time. But dare I say, the movie's worst crime is to be so utterly forgettable. There are a couple of that guy performances in there. Poor Zach Grenier, I'm looking at you. But otherwise, as a cast you've never heard of nor seen since. And the script, the script. From the bizarrely earnest to the earnestly bizarre. We run the gamut from parents always lie to their children to prepare them for the way they will be treated later by the government, to you've gotten a lot harder since you've been away. And did I mention this was an action movie? I did, didn't I? Right at the start. Well, it's not. I lied. It has no action in it whatsoever. So I'm not sure if this is an action movie with no action, or everyone involved thought it was a thriller, in which case it has no thrills. I think the latter might be true, because this was apparently originally to be called The Exchange, but that wasn't deemed Van Damme enough of the title. Never mind that it made a lot more sense. I don't think one has to stretch one's intellect all that much to see why Lam never did get to make his face off. Although actually we'll talk about that more in a minute. Though the misguided career opportunity afforded by Van Damme, which no doubt came from a genuine place, certainly explains how these two ended up in each other's company so much over the coming years. In short, I see no reason whatsoever to recommend anyone ever watching this movie.
The name doesn't make any sense, does it? There's nothing maximum or risky about pretty much anything that happens in it, apart from the thinking somehow that Zach Grenier could do in Russian accent. or I'm thinking as a central plot point, there's no reason for me to go and mess with incredibly dangerous gangsters, but let's.
It's a bit risky, to be fair. I don't know about maximum, but it's quite risky.
I just knew nothing about this film at all till you'd mentioned it a couple of weeks ago, Craig, during one of our other discussions about Van Damme. And I thought, well, sit down and watch this, and it starts off in the south of France. Like, oh, I like the south of France, that's quite good. You don't see that many action films set there. And the buildings and streets and things look quite different from a lot of other places. Oh, this looks like quite an interesting location, at least visually. And then, of course, your man has his accident on his... Was it like a moped or something? I've forgotten the actual details of it now.
It's like a vegetable delivery Vespa or something.
Yeah, which he clearly brakes, pulls the brakes on as he's coming to that wall, and then it clearly accelerates once it stops after that.
I laughed so hard at that scene, and I can only assume it was not intended to be funny. That was the most unintentionally funny thing I have seen in months.
Yeah, I also laughed heartily at that, Craig.
To be fair, I would recommend this film simply because of that, because it was very funny.
In retrospect as well, and it's something you can only appreciate after having viewed the movie. In that first 5 minutes, the way that character acts, Van Damme's other character, Mikhail, does he act the way you would expect a hardened gangster who has grown up in Little Odessa, New York to act? Or does he act as though he's in an Inspector Clouseau movie?
It's very much more the second, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. So it starts off in Nice in the south of France. They're thinking, oh, very interesting. And then within, 10 minutes, we're basically in gloomy, supposed to be New York alleyways. Like, oh, great. I've not seen that 10,000 times. Wonderful. How interesting and visually distinctive that was. Wow. And yet things didn't look up from there. It's the accents are appalling and inconsistent, and I don't know, it's just... I can remember more of it than I care to, such as my curse, but it's just so nondescript in the most part, apart from the fact that we get to the end of it, Natasha Henstridge says to Alan, "You're a good person, as was your brother. Your brother, the Russian mafia person."
Yeah.
Weird definitions you have there, lady. But of course, you decided to get off with this person who you now know is not your brother, while being held hostage by 2 FBI agents in a tiny bathroom. Super romantic. Yes.
Oh, she's got no problem squaring that away. Can I not also point out, the only reason this movie starts in Nice is to explain away Van Damme's accent. Could we not have set it in Brussels?
I think Belgian accents, unless you really know French, I suspect, are at least similar enough to French that I'll let that slide. He's done a lot of films in France.
Are there tax reasons? Is it cheaper to film in France than it is in Belgium?
Did they want a holiday?
I don't know, but it's strange that they bothered to explain his accent, because they kind of give up on that in the next two films.
Next two. This is one of a handful of films where they felt obliged to even attempt, I think.
I'm not quite as down on Maximum Risk as you guys are, but I still wouldn't recommend it to anyone.
Well, clearly you don't value our friendship then.
I think part of that is because I've seen the next two films that we'll go and talk about, and it's made this, in retrospect, quite a bit better.
It's all relative, right, Scott?
If you squint at Maximum Risk a bit, it looks like a normal film, which is not something you can probably say of the other two. It shares enough commonality with conventional plotting that you can probably see it in a reflection and think it's a proper film, and it's just not very good. It's more of a thriller. It's trying to reach parts of Jean-Claude Van Damme's acting range that I don't think he can quite get to, and the script hasn't quite backed up. Things like trying to have an emotional scene over the death of the taxi driver that he's known for a day. It's like,
I forgot about the taxi driver.
Yeah, the guy who's basically Mel Gibson in Conspiracy Theory.
Yeah. You know that guy playing the taxi driver thought this was going to be his big break. Yeah, he was acting in an entirely different film.
Yeah, that's actually, just you mentioned that's got reminded me of something else. A couple points in this film actually where someone gets like injured or something, and because apparently the characters have read the script, they know they don't need to bother trying and phone in for an ambulance or anything. It's like, no, it's not going to work. Even it's like the situation is that possibly they could be saved. You'd maybe try. But no, we've read the script. We know he doesn't make it, so we won't bother.
It's almost a pastiche of genre cliches and tropes. Almost hangs enough together as well enough that if you don't inspect it too closely, you could think of it as a proper film, but it's not a very good one, and I wouldn't particularly advise that anyone go and check it out, even if they are the hardened Jean-Claude Van Damme film, because it doesn't really deliver anything of use that Jean-Claude Van Damme typically would. It's not an awful lot of action in it. There's perhaps one decent car chase at the very end, and that part after the fall they're all at the bank, but it's not worth enough. And I did like that first opening sequence where you're joined in media res, which is the first time you'd say that about a Jean-Claude Van Damme film, I think. But the whole stretch in the middle is just not even competent. Almost competent, but not quite. And that's not really what we're in the business of advising people watch. So, no.
Yeah, the whole thing's absolutely perfunctory. That's my problem with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but Scott's right, though, is that, it's a film. It has the traits of a film. Not the traits of a good film. It has the traits of a film.
It certainly appears to have been shot on film stock. I'll give it that.
But what I don't get, though, is like, in what way is this a Ringo Lam film? Mm-hmm. For all of the problems of Jean Woo's, I don't know why someone made him Jean Woo, it's like now he's French.
Jean-Claude Van Woo.
Yes, Jean Woo Van Damme. All of the problems of John Woo's Hollywood output, it's like, they had like a flair and a style in certain places, and they felt like a John Woo film. Mm-hmm. Whereas this, like, where's the Ringo Lam stamp on this? There's no flair or style or anything.
It's been a while since I've watched a lot of Ringo Lam films, but there's only like one scene even that had a little bit of that personality to it, to me, which was when after the chase at the end, when they crashed the van, I think they were in at the time, and what's his face, the Russian bad guy who's Zach Grenier's character.
It's either Mikhail, Yuri,
Ivan,
or
Ivan.
Dimitri, because that's as inventive as they got with the names.
Oh, it's Ivan, Craig. It's like the the Russian John. Mm-hmm. You could not get less inventive than having somebody called Ivan.
It's the bit where he has his mate in the his French cop mate in the van as a hostage. Mm-hmm. They've kind of broken free. The guy's broken free a bit, and then he shoves Ivan up through the window, and Jean-Claude batters him back down again. That one scene is the only bit that's got any kind of personality to it whatsoever.
There's something that's popped back into my memory there, though. It's like, there's actually one point of Jean-Claude Van Damme's acting in this, I thought, oh, actually that was quite good. And it was unexpected. It's like the bit when he's in the bank listening to the recorded tape message of his brother.
Yeah.
And he's sitting and he's crying a wee bit and his lips slightly quivering, but actually that was quite subdued. It's like, I didn't think Jean-Claude Van Damme had that in him.
Yeah.
Where's it in the rest of the film?
Yeah.
Because like that could have so easily go over the top. It's actually no. It's like that's actually pitched pretty much perfectly.
I think we touched on this the last time when you and I. It was just you and I, wasn't it, Drew? In the last Van Damme episode,
The double team one, yeah.
Yes, about double team stuff. We spoke about this before, where there's. Oh my God, there's a sense of frustration around Van Damme has actually got some talent. I think it was acknowledged at the time. I think when he did, I think one of the whole things around the point at which Nowhere to Run, is it called, came out. I've not actually seen it, but I remember the conversation round it, that people were acknowledging that of all these sort of B-movie action stars, that Van Damme might actually be the guy who might be able to break through and who actually had some sort of acting talent. And we see sort of at various points, we see sort of really frustrating little glimpses. And I would argue the next film we're going to talk about, there's one or two there. They feel comically out of place in the context of the actual film. But there's one or two instances where you're like, oh, bless him, he's not that bad and he's making a bit of an effort. And you can imagine this performance actually sitting quite well if it was in an entirely different movie.
Yeah, it's something that he deserves. I mean, if you look at the stuff he actually does in JCVD, he clearly has some acting skill.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he certainly he can do some reasonably subtle emotions, you know. So
there's a film we need to go back to.
JCVD, yeah, I wouldn't have any problem with that. I think